We have been farming in Ireland for thousands of years, and our farmhouses and farm buildings represent a very important part of our architectural heritage and built heritage in the country. And as a result, the Heritage Council runs a scheme called the GLAS Traditional Farm Building Scheme, which recognises the importance of these older farm buildings and seeks to preserve them and make sure that they continue to be used and don't fall into disrepair. Now, many of these farm buildings are not in use anymore and have been replaced by sheds and dairies and so on, and more modern building structures, but quite often they're located around a traditional yard or adjacent to a farmhouse. This scheme enables a farmer who is GLAS registered to avail of this funding to carry out necessary repair works to these farm buildings should he or she wish. So what's involved with the application process and the scheme, and that's what I'm going to go through now. Approximately 50 to 70 projects get funded every year throughout the country. The Heritage Council likes to spread the funding nationwide. The application process is competitive, so you are given marks for your application, and then it's a competitive process, so 50 out of all the applicants or so will be successful each year. So the grants range from between 4,000 up to a maximum of €25,000. And this can represent 75% of the costs of the works that are going to be carried out. So the applicant will have to provide a minimum of 25% of the funding themselves. The application is usually submitted sometime in the middle of February. Now, the 2021 scheme hasn't been officially announced yet, so we're not too sure whether it will be running in 2021. But if you're thinking about it, it's no harm to start looking at your building, taking some photographs, maybe getting a builder or a local architect involved to just give you a bit of advice on what you might be able to do and how much it might cost, so that if they announce the scheme, you'll have some preparatory work done. So who can apply? Well, first of all, this scheme only applies to traditional farm buildings. The applicant must be a farmer. The applicant must have a GLAS contract with the department and must be either the owner of the building or have the permission of the building owner. And the building must be located on the GLAS approved land. So then what buildings are eligible? Well, the first cut-off mark is 1960, so the building has to predate 1960. After that, the criteria are that it is not in a ruined state, that it is in somewhat fair condition. Grant is really to stabilise and preserve the existing farm building. So it can't be used to rebuild a ruin, for instance, but it can be used to, we'll say, construct maybe a section of roof that has collapsed and so on, but the building has to be capable of being repaired. So the other thing is the grant is for farm buildings. So it's not to do with converting a shed into a house or converting it into a granny flat or so on. The idea is that when the building has been restored, that it can be used for agricultural purposes. So then there's an application form. The form is pretty short. I think there's about 6 pages that have to be filled in, addresses, names, etc., etc. Then, in addition to the application form, it's also advised that you would submit quite a lot of photographs of the building. The Heritage Council, the people that will be assessing the application form, won't visit your property when they're assessing it. So they're relying on whatever you send in. So the more photographs you have, the better. And they also like to get an idea of the context of the farm building. So if you can see your farm building from the road, that's great. Take a photograph from the road, or if it has a kind of a particular setting in the surrounding countryside, take photographs of that, and then take photographs of the exterior, and maybe other photographs of, we'll say, the areas that are that really need to be repaired. So that's the photographs, a site location map, and then the other thing that needs to be submitted is a cost breakdown. So you can either get a builder to quote for the works that you intend carrying out, or else you can try and estimate it yourself. And you, in both cases, you would need to break down the labour and materials. It's probably most straightforward to get a good local contractor to give you a price, and it's more official and probably more less open to question. Then in the application form, there are a few sections to fill out, and it's good to pay attention to these sections because these are what you are assessed on. There are 5 criteria. There's the heritage interest of the building. There's the landscape value. How can you demonstrate that it'll be of public benefit? There's the habitat value, there's the environmental sustainability, and then there's the best value for money. Now, you basically get 20 marks for each of those criteria out of 100. And there's a cutoff of 60. So, spend a little bit of time on each of these. So we might go through those a little bit now in more detail in the next slide. So the photos, I've already said, to take good photographs of, not just close-ups of the building, but of its setting. You can see some examples there in slide number 5. Then the heritage interest. What is the heritage interest of your building? If you know what age your building is, if you have some history of the farm, or if you have some historical maps showing, that the building was there, we'll say in the 1830s or the 1890s or so on, that would be useful. If you know what the building was used for, was it a dairy? Was it a stables? Was it a forge, for instance? You may be able to see from the inside of the building what it was used for. Then the other part of the heritage interest is, what is the building made out of? So, like, for instance, are the walls stone? Are they mud walls? Is the roof thatch? Is it slate? Is it tin? Are there original gutters? And so on. You kind of look at all the different parts of your building and do a little description of what they are. This will give kind of more of a feel of what the building is. Are there any features in it? Are there archways? Are these in brick? Are there cut stone windowsills? What is the floor made out of? Is it paved? Is it earth? Is it cobbles? And so on. This is part of what is the heritage interest of the building. Then the public benefit. This is really, can it be, once you have restored your shed, can it be seen by the public? So is it visible from a public road? Many farm buildings, particularly the older ones and the ones that may have gone out of use, are ideal habitats for wildlife, most notably bats and sometimes owls and so on. Now, some of these are protected species, in particular the bats and the owls. And so if you think that you have bats in the building that you are proposing to repair or restore, and if you're successful with your grant application, you'll be advised to get a bat survey done. These are pretty straightforward to organise, and you get 75% of the cost of the bat survey. So the bat survey, a specialist will come out and particularly at dusk and possibly at dawn, and literally count the number and the species, identify the species of bat that are coming in and out of your building. And they'll be able to advise then on what kind of roosting site you have, because you may have a nursery roost where the female bats raise their young in your farm building, in which case work might be prevented between June and the end of August, which can put some of these projects under a lot of pressure, because it only gives a very small window of time to carry out the works, namely September and October. The works have to be finished by the end of October at the latest. So that's just something to keep in mind. So in your application form, you will be describing what wildlife you have around and whether there might possibly be bats there and so on. And as well, the Heritage Council takes a very sympathetic approach towards the bats. So you will be then advised to put in maybe temporary roosting boxes for the bats while the works are ongoing, and also when you're carrying out the works that you will also be advised to put in holes and so on to facilitate the bats returning to the building. Now, another assessment criterion is the climate change mitigation. So that's a section in the application form. I guess the way to approach this is that, reusing and recycling is very environmentally friendly. So if you are going to put a building that has fallen into disrepair or disuse back into use, that is a very environmentally friendly action. And also you will be reusing the existing building fabric, the existing building materials. Perhaps you can have a look around your farm and see if there's stone lying around that could be reused in wall repair, or old rainwater goods that came off another shed that might now be gone that you could reuse, and so on. So that's the approach to take. You are putting an older building back into use, and you will be using as much salvaged building materials as you can, and then ones that you have to source outside of your farm, you'll be keeping it as local as possible. So for instance, you might get local stone, or you might be able to salvage slate locally, and so on, so that is how that section is looked at. Also, it might be appropriate to consider rainwater collection from the roof of your new building, even if it's just going into drums that you'll use for drinkers or washing or whatever, you might consider that. Then the last criterion is the best value for money. So the way the Heritage Council approaches this really is that they want to see that whatever you are investing your money in is going to get most return. So that's why they stay away from very costly projects like totally reinstating a ruined building. But the argument that you have to make is that you are going to be using this building once it's repaired. You might describe what you intend to use it for, and that then the costs that are going to be spent in it can be justified because you'll have a whole new building in at your disposal. So that's the way to deal with that section. Now, you don't really need a conservation consultant at application stage, but if you're successful, you will be required to then engage a conservation consultant like an architect or an engineer who's accredited in conservation to supervise your project. And what that conservation consultant will do is that they'll initially visit your buildings, they'll make an assessment of the condition of it, and they will prepare a specification of the work, which will be a description of the building, photographs, and a specification of what repair works are necessary and how they should be carried out. And that then is what your building contractor will use to guide him in his work. So then once they have that conservation specification of work done, that's submitted to the Heritage Council, who have to approve it before any work starts. And then after that, your conservation consultant will inspect the works at appropriate intervals. They will prepare an interim report during the works, which is submitted to the Heritage Council. And then when the works are complete, they'll prepare a completion report, and they'll also sign off on the costs and the work carried out. So the conservation consultant plays quite an active role in the project once you get your funding approved. Then the conservation building works. So it depends on what's going to be carried out. Typically, most good roofers are capable of carrying out the roofing work. But for instance, if there's an interesting slate pattern in your roof, the roofer will have to be prepared and be happy to reinstate that slate pattern. And for instance, bed the ridge tiles and lime mortar and so on. So it makes life easier if the builders who are involved are experienced in conservation work, but it's not necessary. When it comes to the stonework repair, a good stonemason will be well able to use the lime mortars that'll be required. Sometimes there are mud walls to be repaired. These are a little bit trickier, and I've had contractors learn how to make mud bricks and do it very successfully. I have a slide later on showing that. So, your building contractor, it will make your life easier if you get a sympathetic building contractor who's happy to work on old buildings. So all the different, whatever part of your building that you're repairing, you really will be trying to replace like with like. You'll try and retain as much of the original building fabric that's there, that's intact, that's in good condition. All of that will just be left alone, essentially. And then anything that needs to be repaired or replaced, it'll be done on a like for like basis. There won't be any new modern materials introduced unless absolutely necessary. Like, for instance, stainless steel is sometimes introduced to stitch a wall, a crack in a stone wall to stabilize it. But other than that, really, when you look at your own farm building, whatever materials are in it, when it's finished, you'll have used the same type of materials, essentially. And again, in this situation, it's good to look around your yard and just see, well, what have you already got there that you could reuse? So that is really it in a nutshell. You will do your application as best as you can with your photographs. Then if you're successful, you'll appoint your conservation consultant, and you'll possibly already have a builder in mind. And then between those two, hopefully the work will be carried out, and the Heritage Council will be happy with it. The Heritage Council does come out on site and inspect, and they will often send their own conservation architects to report back to them on how they think, like an independent conservation architect to report on how they feel the work has been carried out. So I just have two examples of different interesting things that happened on one or two projects. I mentioned before about the mud bricks. So in this case, the contractors were a young firm of conservation builders, and they were very happy to make mud bricks for the first time, and they made them in the old traditional way of collecting good mud off the farm and mixing it up on site and pounding it into the ground with their feet, as you can see there. So they made mud bricks, and they repaired then the damaged mud wall with those bricks, and then lime washed it afterwards. And then in my 11th slide, I have just shown where in another project the builder built a special lintel over this opening to accommodate a little bat roost. So we called it the Bat Hotel because he got very into it, and once the bat got up through that slot, there was all these lovely crevices that the bats could go in and roost in comfortably. So that was another very enthusiastic builder. And then This is my last slide. This was a project that was done recently in Longford, where a whole courtyard really was revealed and restored under the GLAS scheme, and I'd like to thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.